Lesson 6H, Carbon dioxide transport. Whereas oxygen is mainly transported by red blood cells, carbon dioxide is primarily transported using the other component of blood, plasma. At the tissue, carbon dioxide is being created at the mitochondria when glucose and oxygen are being used to create ATP, a process called cellular respiration. This creation of CO2 will increase its partial pressure in tissue relative to the partial pressure of CO2 in blood. This will drive CO2 to enter the blood. In the blood plasma, CO2 will bind to water with the help of a special enzyme called carbonic anhydrase. This will create carbonic acid. Acids will often dissociate, releasing hydrogen ions. In this case, carbonic acid releases hydrogen ions and creates hydrogen carbonate ions, also known as bicarbonate ions. The free hydrogen ions make the tissue more acidic, hence the lower pH. This lower pH as well as temperature change causes a conformational change in hemoglobin, and this is the reason why oxygen is released from the red blood cells into plasma at the tissue capillary beds. This is also how 70% of carbon dioxide travels to the lungs, as either dissolved carbonic acid or bicarbonate ion in blood plasma, not on red blood cells. The free hydrogen ion from the dissociation of carbonic acid will often bind to hemoglobin to further compete with oxygen. This forces some oxygen to leave the red blood cells at tissue, creating reduced hemoglobin. Another 20% of carbon dioxide will actually compete with oxygen directly for the heme on hemoglobin. This will also force oxygen to leave the red blood cell and enter plasma at tissue. We call this carbon hemoglobin complex carbonyl hemoglobin. While 70% of carbon dioxide travels to the lungs as dissolved carbonic acid or bicarbonate ion, 20% as carbonyl hemoglobin, the last 10% travels to the lungs simply as dissolved CO2 in plasma. Once the carbon dioxide arrives at the lungs via the blood circulatory system, the lower temperature and higher pH causes the hemoglobin to change shapes. The carbonyl hemoglobin will eject the CO2 that was bound to it. Also at the lungs is carbonic anhydrase, which works in reverse, converting carbonic acid and bicarbonate ion back into water and CO2. The abundance of CO2 in plasma creates a high partial pressure in the blood relative to the air in the alveoli, and CO2 will be pushed into the lungs. This frees up the red blood cells to pick up oxygen and to repeat the entire process once again.